jobs. He's looking to be the biggest wrestling company in the world, and for 80 plus weeks, Nitro was the dominant and the far superior wrestling show than was the WWF at the time. Until Bischoff made the dumb mistake and say, hey, by the way, if you turn over to the other one, who really wants to see Mankind win the title? But that's another story for another time. And I'm sure we could talk about the Monday Night War for days. And, I mean, not to say that I don't have my own opinions about it and whatnot. But, if you have the WWE Network, go look at it. They had the bigger draws. And his comments about Nash, Hall, X-Pac, he left Hogan out, I guess. But, all of them are employed because Bischoff wants to show he's got the biggest dick of all the promoters. And he can hang out with them and do this. Yes, I can see where Cornette comes from with that, because many years later it was said that the inmates controlled the asylum, and it was true. He just wanted to be the good guy amongst the boys and let him pretty much run wild, cause anarchy, do whatever he wanted to do. So, I wanted to play those two clips because I wanted to get to Table for Three and how much time changes. Whether it be time heals all wounds, or now that they finally have, that they finally had a chance to meet face to face, if this was the case. Because at the very beginning of the show, or at the beginning of this Table for Three, again, I stated title Creative Committee. This was the first public meeting and talking that Bischoff and Cornette have ever done. And to think that they've been in the industry for God knows how long, Cornette for much longer, and considering what Bischoff did, for wrestling as a whole, I mean, years later, you still see the effects. It's amazing that they never met once. They just kept talking shit. And at the very beginning of the show, or around the beginning of the show, they were mentioning how much they hated Vince Russo, the guy that in which reports had recently said that Vince Russo was in contacts with WWE about coming back to the company. Now, the only thing I'll ever agree with Vince Russo on is about wrestlers having a union, but that would also destroy wrestling in a lot of ways and a lot of the promoters. So either way, that's probably the only real thing I agree with him with. Other than that, he's awful. He really should not have. He really should have no role in wrestling. He just stick to podcasting for right now. Stick to his opinions, and you know what? People will listen to him because it's ridiculous. What has he got to say? That's where his draw is. Because like, what are you smoking? Yet you're allowed to talk, and it's his own podcast. He can do whatever the hell he wants, and that's what the great thing about podcasting is that anybody, even a schmuck like myself, could get a show anywhere. Well, not anywhere, but like, I could do one on, my own, really. But here I am, filling the void podcast network, so this is great. My network, but still it doesn't matter. Let me just read a couple of the comments here. Jamels, he listens to Russo, it's great. Let's see. NWO, Crow, Staying Rare, it's only good creations in Goldberg, and he ran all three of those angles to the ground. Alright. Cornette failed as a creative head in WWE and TNA. Yeah, but who also worked for TNA as a creative head and failed? I mean, given what you're working with here, I mean, come on, you're destined to fail. I don't know about TNA these days. I watch a little bit of it. It's still, I like it, and I happen to know people who are working for the company now. I've either worked with them or I talked to them in the past, good people. And then Vince Russo replaced both those guys. Both facts. Both facts. Russo replaced Bischoff, and then Bischoff tried coming back and all that nonsense. And then Cornette was the head of creative right before Russo came in. So, let's see. Super Bowl 1993. That is the time that Jim Cornette had said that Bischoff and him had any first meeting or interaction, where they had a Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express shoot angle, basically working through Bill Watts' company, and he wanted to. He accused Bischoff of wanting to take over Watts' territory, and he had edited a lot of whatever shoot angle it was from the TV, and everybody finger pointed Bischoff. So that was Cornette's first impression of Bischoff. And then the second time, he said that they had met 2 years later, where Eric Bischoff basically recruited Ole Anderson just to fire him. And they're at the power plant. They brought him in, and it's funny how it's like Bischoff knew that what incident Cornette was talking about, because he also offered a reply later about, oh yeah, you drove up in a nice car. What was it, a black Corvette? Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I love that car. Yeah, I also love wiping a booger on your windshield. I also like wiping a booger on your windshield for your troubles, basically. And they didn't really, he really didn't take too kindly to that. But that's besides the point. That's neither here or there. Basically, Eric Bischoff, like I had stated, he denied control of the territory at the time, which was Super Bowl 1993, which is Super Bowl 3. Super Brawl 3, excuse me. And then basically saying, oh, this is what happens when you have stooges, you listen to stooges. And at first it started going back and forth. That this is like, oh, here we go. Here we go. And then Cornette makes a comment of, well, before we sat down here at the table, I happen to hear that you hate Vince Russo just as much as I am. And, and then that's where their common bond was, and they started liking one another. Because if you listen to Bischoff on Russo, he has no love lost for him at all either. Because he took over the company, and he, I don't know what kind of I don't know exactly what happened there, why he took over, this, that, the other. I mean, I know there's interviews out there. I can't remember off the top of my head of what exactly had hhappened at that point. Now I'm just reading here in the chat here. And if you're listening to me right now, you could go on Spreaker.com/filling_the_void and chat here in the comments. James is bringing up where Russo, TNA was drawing 1.5 to 2 ratings when Russo booked the show. Russo always tries to get his roster over. And ratings were better in WCW at the time. And then by time Bischoff kind of came back, it was too late. And Bischoff sued Russo over what I don't know. So, for Bash at the Beach 2000, that was the whole Jarrett Hogan incident. And then it was basically a whole shoot of the show the rest of the way through. That was a disaster. That was an absolute disaster. But that's wrestling history. And I would like to think, I watched a lot of Russo. I watched a lot of TNA around when Russo was booking. The Last Rights match? Really? Sting and Abyss, I believe it was, for the title. At that time, back when Father James Mitchell was managing Abyss, just some of the... I can't... Okay, I can't deny that Vince Russo is a creative mind. He is. He's better suited running a television show if he were to, get into television. That's kind of what Eric Bischoff does right now. He's a very creative mind. But Russo actually explains the Bash at the Beach. Oh, God. I can't even imagine. Actually, wait. I think I do remember that. Because they had like a little snippet about the actual incident itself. I can't remember what it was, but I remember listening to it. Either way, I think a lot of the time, and this is just me being an asshole. I mean, then again, the fat chick Thriller Mike Awesome, which was a disaster of a gimmick. You had the ICP in there running Rockshaw. You had Vampiro with the Misfits, and I can't talk shit because Jerry's my cousin. I love you, Jerry. But you had the Misfits, a horror punk band in WCW with Vampiro, a very underrated wrestler, I believe. But why would as nothing. As nothing. He doesn't need to come back for anything. Jeez. I mean, they already had Freddie Prinze Jr. fail over there as well. Why bring in Russo and just nobody likes him? I mean, again, he's a creative mind, but for God's sake, nobody likes him. The ratings are at historic lows right now, and yet ratings are at historic lows, and yet you want to bring him back? Okay, you might get a little bit of a boost for a couple of weeks, but then you're going to realize why Russo was not around the WWE is not around the WWE anymore. Period. It's just a recipe for disaster if he were to come in. No way. And what's he going to do? Try and do shit with Raw? No way. Right now, for the most part, both shows are a disaster. I'll get to Extreme Rules later, but let me get back here on track with the table for three. Then they basically have a discussion about the power plant and how that was being utilized then, and how Bischoff was saying, if it weren't, for whatever animosity him and Russo may have had or him and Cornette may have had for one another. So, you know what I mean? Like, he would have liked to have used talent from Smoky Mountain because, at that point, and Bischoff had said it, Cornette concurred, and I believe Michael Hayes concurred too, that the territories were done, and you couldn't feed off of that talent in the territory gimmicks anymore. Because that was a long gone, system by the 1990s, or by the 1990s when the power plant was becoming as what it was. And Cornette liked the idea because of the power plant. They're talking about that because help get guys in the ring shape for going back on television and all that sort of stuff, which is basically right now what the Performance Center for the WWE does right now. And Smoky Mountain was great. Smoky Mountain had great talents. I believe Cornette had mentioned they had found Candido, Kane, and a bunch of guys who had basically gotten their first shot at Smoky Mountain Wrestling. So, much like ECW, which Cornette was also crucial, that would have been a better table for three. No offense to Michael P.S. Hayes, but he should have been fired for his racist comments for a long time ago against Mark Henry. Mark Henry is a nice guy, and he basically forgave him. And if that weren't the case, P.S. Hayes would have been probably working for TNA a long time ago and still be there. But that's neither here or there. I think the better table for three would have been Heyman, Cornette, Bischoff. I mean, that would have been an absolute nightmare because P.S. Hayes basically served as the mediator for this, which is okay. But now I want to see and none of them and neither and